People think Family Feud is about trivia and prizes. This episode was about a soldier who couldn't afford to bury the brother who saved his life. Every night at 2100 hours, 9 p.m. civilian time, for 11 years, Marcus Reed called his brother Elijah. And every night at 2100 hours for 11 years, Elijah called Marcus. The calls crossed. They always crossed. The phone would ring once on each end, and whoever picked up first would say 3 words. "Still here, brother," and the other would say it back. And that was it. No small talk. No updates. No news. Just a nightly confirmation that the person you loved most in the world was still breathing. They started the ritual on the night of July 4th, 2008, after their first deployment together with the 82nd Airborne Division to Kandahar Province, Afghanistan. The night a mortar round hit 40 feet from their sleeping position, and they both lay in the dark counting each other's breaths until dawn. For 11 years, they never missed a night. On March 22, 2019, Marcus called at 2100. The phone rang 4 times. Nobody answered. Nobody said, "Still here, brother." Nobody ever would again. 3 months later, Marcus Reed walked onto the Family Feud stage, carrying his brother's dog tags under his shirt and his brother's unpaid funeral bill in his back pocket, and answered Steve Harvey's opening question with 10 words that stopped the room cold. "I'm playing for my brother's funeral. He saved my life." Steve Harvey was sitting in his host chair, leaning back, mid-laugh from the previous family's introduction. When Marcus said those words, Steve's body went still, then his hands went to the armrests, and he stood up. Not at a break. Not between rounds. Mid-game. He pushed himself out of the chair and stood and looked at Marcus Reed and said 5 words. "He carried you. Now rest." Then his voice failed him, and that wasn't even the part that made Steve cry. Sergeant First Class Elijah Reed died on March 22, 2019 at 3:47 in the morning in the parking lot of a VA hospital in Fayetteville, North Carolina, from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He was 36 years old. He had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2008, 2010, 2013, and 1 in Iraq in 2015. He had a Bronze Star. He had a Purple Heart. He had a traumatic brain injury from a blast in Helmand Province that left him with migraines so severe he sometimes could not open his eyes for 2 days. He had post-traumatic stress disorder that the VA rated at 70%, and that Elijah knew was 100%. He had been requesting a transfer to a specialized PTSD treatment program at the VA for 14 months. His request was under review. He was on a wait list. The waitlist was 847 names long. He died in a parking lot, waiting for his name to be called. Marcus was the one who identified the body. He drove from Fort Liberty, then still called Fort Bragg, to the VA hospital at 4:30 in the morning, still in the shorts and t-shirt he had been sleeping in. And he walked into the room where they had taken Elijah, and he looked at his brother's face, and the face was calm. Calmer than Marcus had seen it in years, and that calmness was the thing that broke him. Not the death, but the peace on the face of a man who had not been peaceful in a decade. Before March 22, 2019, the Reed brothers were inseparable. They grew up in Fayetteville, North Carolina, Army brats, sons of a retired staff sergeant named William Reed who had served in Desert Storm and who raised them with the understanding that service was not a career but an identity. Marcus was the younger brother by 2 years. Elijah was the protector. When Marcus was jumped behind the middle school by 3 kids from a rival neighborhood, Elijah walked into the principal's office the next day and said he would be escorting his brother to and from school until further notice. And he did. For 2 years, every morning and every afternoon, without complaint. When Marcus enlisted at 18, Elijah re-enlisted so they could deploy together when a mortar round hit 40 feet from their position on July 4, 2008. And Marcus froze. Couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't make his legs work. Elijah crawled to him in the dark and put his hand on the back of Marcus's neck and said, "Still here, brother." That was the night the phone call started. On their second deployment, in June 2010, a convoy Marcus was riding in hit an eyed outside Marja. The blast flipped the vehicle. Marcus was pinned beneath the door frame, his left arm shattered, fuel leaking onto his uniform. Elijah was in the vehicle behind. He sprinted 50 yards through open ground, pulled the door off Marcus with his bare hands. The after-action report used the phrase "extraordinary physical effort under fire" and dragged him to cover. Elijah received the Bronze Star. Marcus received reconstructive surgery on his left arm and 8 titanium pins, and a debt he would spend the rest of his life trying to repay. They came home. They survived. But Elijah did not come home the same. The migraines started in 2014. The nightmares never stopped. He drank, not socially, medicinally, a bottle of bourbon every 3 days. Precise. Regulated. The way a soldier regulates everything, because control is the only thing between function and collapse. He was married briefly, a woman named Dana who loved him and left after 18 months because she said she couldn't compete with a war she hadn't been in. There was a daughter, Nyla, born in 2014, 3 months before the divorce. Elijah saw Nyla every other weekend when he could manage it, and every night on FaceTime when he couldn't. He was a good father in the way that broken men are sometimes the most tender fathers. Gentle with her, patient, reading her stories in voices that made her laugh, building blanket forts in his apartment that he called forward operating bases. He hid the drinking from Nyla. He hid the migraines from Nyla. He hid everything from Nyla except the love, and the love was real and constant, and the one thing the war had not damaged. Marcus watched his brother deteriorate. He called the VA. He called Elijah's case manager. He wrote letters. He drove Elijah to appointments. He sat in waiting rooms. He argued with administrators. He begged. The Specialized Treatment Program, a residential PTSD program in Palo Alto, California, that had a 78% improvement rate, had a 14-month wait list. Elijah's name was added in January 2018. In February 2019, Marcus called the VA to check the status. Elijah was number 212 on the list. He had moved up 635 spots in 13 months. At that rate, he would reach the top in approximately 4 more months. Elijah did not have 4 more months. Marcus knew. He could hear it in the phone calls. The "still here, brother" had changed. The cadence was slower. The voice was flatter. The pause before the words was longer. On March 21, 2019, Marcus called at 2100. Elijah answered. "Still here, brother." His voice was calm, calmer than Marcus had heard it in months. Marcus said, "Still here, brother." They hung up. 14 hours later, a VA security guard found Elijah in the parking lot. The funeral home in Fayetteville, Richardson's Memorial Chapel, provided an estimate, $13,800 for the service, the casket, the burial with full military honors at Sand Hill State Veterans Cemetery. Elijah's VA life insurance, service members' group life insurance, had lapsed 6 months before his death. He had stopped paying the premium. Marcus did not know until he called the SCLE office 4 days after the funeral home estimate. The death gratuity did not apply. Elijah's death was not in the line of duty. Marcus was a sergeant himself, earning $3,445 per month in base pay. He had $2,100 in savings. He had child support payments of $600 per month for his own son, DeAndre, who was 9 and lived with his mother in Charlotte. He could not afford $13,800. He borrowed $3,000 from his father, William, who was on a military pension and Social Security. He borrowed $2,000 from a fellow soldier named Jackson. He sold Elijah's truck, a 2012 Chevy Silverado, for $8,500, which the buyer negotiated down from $10,000 because the transmission slipped in second gear. He was still $300 short of the deposit Richardsons required before scheduling the service. Elijah's body had been at the funeral home for 67 days. One evening, Marcus was at his father's house in Fayetteville, sitting at the kitchen table going through Elijah's belongings, a box of things Dana had sent over after cleaning out the apartment. Dock tags, a bronze star in a velvet case, a copy of The Alchemist with pages folded down, and a phone, Elijah's phone, cracked screen, dead battery. Marcus plugged it in. When it powered on, the lock screen was a photograph of Nyla in a tutu at her dance recital. There were 47 missed calls from Marcus every night at 2100, starting March 23rd, the night after Elijah died. Marcus had been calling every night. He knew no one would answer. He called anyway, because stopping meant Elijah was gone, and he was not ready for Elijah to be gone. Nyla was 5. She lived with Dana in Raleigh. She knew her father was in heaven, Dana had told her, carefully, gently, in the language of a mother who was trying to make death comprehensible to a child who still believed in the tooth fairy. Nyla accepted it the way 5-year-olds accept things, with a faith that is either pure trust or pure inability to understand. And from the outside, they looked the same. One Sunday, Marcus drove to Raleigh to visit Nyla. He took her to the park. She was on the swings. She looked at him, legs pumping, braids flying, and said, "Is my daddy a hero?" "Mama said he is." Marcus gripped the chains of the swing next to hers and said, "Your daddy is the biggest hero I know." Nyla smiled and kicked higher. Marcus held the chains and looked at the sky, and his jaw was locked so tight a muscle in his temple twitched. A friend from the base told Marcus about Family Feud auditions in Atlanta. The $20,000 would cover the funeral balance and leave enough for a headstone, a proper headstone. Granite, with Elijah's name and rank, and the bronze star insignia, the kind that tells a stranger walking through a cemetery that this man mattered. Marcus applied. He assembled his team, his father William, his buddy Jackson, a fellow soldier named Tanya, and Nyla's babysitter, Mrs. Diane, who had known both Reed brothers since they were boys. He told them it was for fun. He told them it was to get out of the house. He told no one about the funeral bill or the 67 days or the phone he still called every night at 2100. And then Marcus said something no one was prepared for. The Reed family won the main game, 271 to 244. Marcus was steady, mechanical, answering with a soldier's precision. Steve sent him to fast money. Marcus placed both hands on the podium and answered all 5 questions in 12 seconds. Steve walked to the board. The numbers climbed. 37, 43, 35, 46. The total reached 161 with one answer remaining. Steve said, "We need 39, 38, 199, 1 point." The buzzer sounded. The board went red. Marcus stood at the podium. He did not react. His training held, the part of him that had been conditioned to absorb impact without flinching, the part that had kept his face neutral when mortars hit and vehicles flipped and his brother dragged him through dust and fire. His face was stone. His hands were flat. His breathing was controlled. Steve started toward him with the card, delivering the opening of the consolation line, when Marcus interrupted him. quietly, without emotion. "I'm playing for my brother's funeral, Steve. He saved my life. Twice in Afghanistan. And I can't afford to bury him." Steve Harvey was mid-step. He stopped. He was still seated. He had been leaning forward in his chair, ready to stand for the consolation walk. When Marcus said those words, Steve's hands went to the armrests of his chair and he pushed himself up. He stood. Mid-game. Mid-taping. He stood the way a soldier stands when attention is called, not casually, not gradually, but all at once, spine straight, shoulders back. The card fell from his hand. He looked at Marcus. The studio fell completely silent. "Tell me about him." Marcus told him. Standing at the podium, the dog tags pressing against his chest under the shirt, he told Steve about Elijah. The mortar round on July 4th. The convoy and the eyed in the door Elijah ripped off with his bare hands. The Bronze Star, the migraines, the PTSD, the bourbon, the waitlist, the 847 names, the parking lot at the VA at 3:47 in the morning, the phone call that went unanswered, the 67 days. He told it in a voice that was flat and controlled and military, the voice of a man filing a report, because if he told it any other way, he would not be able to finish. Steve listened. He did not move. When Marcus finished, Steve took off his glasses and folded them and placed them on the podium and rubbed both eyes and stood there with his hands over his face for 7 seconds. The room held its breath. Even the crew members had stopped what they were doing. A camera operator named Lamont lowered his rig. A lighting tech in the catwalk sat down on the rail. Hardened television professionals were looking at the floor. Steve took his hands from his face. His eyes were red. He walked to Marcus and stood directly in front of him, close, eye level, the distance between men who have shared something, and he said, "Stop the game. We're stopping right now." He looked at Carla. "I don't care. We're done." He turned back to Marcus. He said, 26 years ago, I was living in my 1976 Ford Tempo. 3 years in that car. Showering in gas station bathrooms. Eating whatever I could find. And the thing that saved my life was a promise I made. A promise that if I ever got out of that car, I would spend the rest of my life helping people who were where I was. Marcus, your brother made that promise too. He made it to you. On July 4th, 2008, he crawled to you in the dark and he said, "Still here, brother." That was his promise. And he kept it. He kept it in Marja when he pulled you out of that vehicle. He kept it every night at 2100 when he called. He kept it until the very last night. Steve's voice broke. He paused. He steadied himself. He carried you. Now rest. Let me carry this. We're giving this family the $20,000. William Reed, 71 years old, retired staff sergeant, dropped his head and his chest heaved. Jackson pressed his fist against his forehead. Tanya closed her eyes. Mrs. Diane covered her mouth with both hands. Marcus stood at the podium, his face still controlled, his jaw working, his eyes fixed on Steve. And then, slowly, the way a wall falls when the last stone is removed, his composure broke. His chin dropped, his shoulders rounded. He pressed his forehead against the podium, and his body shook. But Steve wasn't done. I made a phone call during our break today. I called Richardson's Memorial Chapel in Fayetteville, North Carolina. I spoke with the director, Mr. Thomas Richardson. I told him about Sergeant First Class Elijah Reed, 3 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq, Bronze Star, Purple Heart. A man who pulled his brother out of a burning vehicle with his bare hands. Steve paused. Richardson's is covering the full funeral, military honors. The casket, the burial, the headstone, granite, with the Bronze Star insignia. Every dollar. No charge. Marcus's knees gave out. He went down to the stage floor, his hands hitting the wood, the dog tag swinging free from his collar. William ran to him, a 71-year-old man running, and knelt beside his son and held him the way he had held both his boys when they were small. One arm around the shoulders, one hand on the back of the head. The posture of a father who had buried too many soldiers in his lifetime and was now burying his own. The opposing family, the Washingtons from Detroit, led by their mother. Carolyn Washington, a 54-year-old school bus driver, crossed the stage. Carolyn knelt beside Marcus and placed her hand on his back and said, "My husband served in the Gulf. Your brother is a hero. Don't let anyone tell you different." Her son Jamal, 22, stood behind her with tears streaming down his face. Her daughter Tiffany held Mrs. Diane. Two families, one from Fayetteville and one from Detroit, one carrying a soldier's unpaid funeral and one carrying the memory of a husband who served, held each other on the floor. He wasn't finished. Steve pulled out his personal phone. He dialed on speaker. The studio went silent. The phone rang 3 times. A deep voice answered. "This is Colonel Raymond Torres," Steve said. "Colonel Torres, this is Steve Harvey. I'm standing on my stage with Sergeant Marcus Reed. His brother was Sergeant First Class Elijah Reed, 82nd Airborne, 3 tours in Afghanistan, Bronze Star recipient. Elijah died on March 22nd of this year. He had been on a VA waitlist for a specialized PTSD treatment program for 14 months. His name was number 212 when he died. The line was quiet. Colonel Torres said, "I know who Elijah Reed was. He served under my command in 2013. He was one of the finest soldiers I've ever led." Steve said, "Colonel, I need you to tell Marcus something." Colonel Torres said, "Marcus, your brother saved lives, not just yours. He saved 4 men in Helmand Province on a night I'm not allowed to talk about in detail. He carried people. That's what he did. He carried people until he couldn't carry himself. And the system that was supposed to carry him failed. I want you to know, I have personally contacted the Secretary of Veterans Affairs and requested an expedited review of PTSD waitlist protocols. Elijah's name is going to mean something. I'll make sure of it." Marcus pressed the phone against his chest and looked at the ceiling and breathed through his nose, and his body was rigid with the effort of not collapsing again. Steve turned to the camera. His face was wet. "I want to talk to everyone watching at home. This man's brother served 3 tours. 3. He had a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart and a traumatic brain injury and PTSD, and he asked for help, and he was put on a wait list with 847 names. 847. He waited 14 months. He moved up to number 212, and then he died in a VA parking lot at 3:47 in the morning because his name hadn't been called yet. That should not happen in this country. If you are watching this and you know a veteran who is struggling, who is waiting, who is calling the VA and getting voicemail, who is drinking alone in an apartment with the shades drawn, do not wait for the system. The system failed Elijah Reed. Be the person who doesn't fail. Call them tonight. Go to their door. Sit with them. Because sometimes the only thing between a soldier and a parking lot is someone who shows up." Steve turned to the Washington family. He told them their appearance fee would be tripled and $15,000 donated to the cause of their choice. Carolyn Washington said, "Give it to veterans' mental health. Every penny for soldiers like Elijah." Steve shook her hand and held it. The clip reached 356 million views across all platforms within 13 days. The hashtag #StillHereBrother trended in 39 countries for 8 days, the longest trending Family Feud hashtag in the show's history. The video was shared by General Mark Milley, who wrote, "Sergeant First Class Elijah Reed deserved better. We owe every veteran better." President Biden shared it and issued a directive to the VA to review mental health waitlist protocols. Within 1 week, over 44,000 people contacted veterans' mental health organizations. Sergeant First Class Elijah Reed was buried on August 3, 2019, at Sand Hills State Veterans Cemetery in Spring Lake, North Carolina, with full military honors. 7 soldiers folded the flag. A bugler played taps. Marcus stood at attention during the entire ceremony, 47 minutes, motionless, in his dress blues, the dog tags around his neck and his brother's dog tags in his left hand. He held both sets against his chest when the bugler played. Nyla stood beside him in a white dress and held his hand during the 21-gun salute without flinching. She was 5. William stood behind them both, his hand on Marcus's shoulder, the weight of a father who had raised 2 soldiers and was now watching one bury the other. 3 months after the burial, the VA announced a restructuring of its PTSD residential treatment waitlist system, reducing the average wait time from 14 months to 4. The initiative was informally called the Reed Protocol. A year after the taping, the Steve Harvey Foundation, in partnership with the Wounded Warrior Project and the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, launched Elijah's Honor, a fund that covers funeral costs for veterans who die by suicide and whose families lack the resources for services. To date, Elijah's Honor has covered 1,673 funerals across 46 states and raised $21.4 million. The fund also operates a 24-hour crisis line staffed by veterans with an average response time of 43 seconds. 2 years after the taping, Marcus left the Army. He took a position as the National Outreach Director for Elijah's Honor. He travels to military bases and VA hospitals and American Legion halls, and he sits with soldiers who are waiting for appointments, waiting for treatment, waiting for their names to be called. And he tells them about a phone call at 2100 and a brother who said still here every night for 11 years, and a parking lot, and a wait list, and a granite headstone with a Bronze Star insignia. He tells them because someone has to. Dana and Nyla moved to Fayetteville after the funeral, so Nyla could be closer to Marcus and William. Nyla is 8 now. She looks like Elijah, the same wide smile, the same way of tilting her head when she is listening. She started karate last year. Her instructor, a retired Marine, told Marcus that she has an unusual calmness under pressure. Marcus said she gets that from her father. Steve Harvey visited Marcus at the cemetery 2 years after the taping. They stood at Elijah's headstone, granite, engraved, the Bronze Star insignia above the dates. A line at the bottom that Marcus had chosen, "Still here, brother." Steve read the headstone and stood there for a long time and said nothing. He said, in an interview with CBS that evening, "I have stood on a lot of stages. I have stood in front of presidents and kings. I have never stood anywhere that taught me more about what it cost to serve than in front of that headstone." Marcus Reed's brother saved his life, and Marcus couldn't afford to bury him. That sentence is the most un-American sentence I have ever heard. And it was true. Today, Marcus Reed is 37. He lives in Fayetteville. He drives Nyla to karate on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He takes her to the cemetery on the first Saturday of every month. And they bring flowers, sunflowers, because Elijah liked them. And Nyla places them at the base of the headstone and says, "Hi, Daddy." Marcus stands behind her and watches. He does not rush her. He does not check his phone. He stands and watches and lets her have as long as she needs. And every night at 2100 every night, without exception, for over 4 years now, Marcus Reed picks up his phone and dials his brother's number. The phone rings 4 times. The voicemail picks up. Elijah's voice, recorded years ago, casual, alive, says, "You've reached Elijah. Leave 1." Marcus does not leave a message. He does not need to. He holds the phone against his ear and listens to his brother's voice, and then he says, into the silence after the beep, 3 words, "Still here, brother." Then he hangs up. He sets the phone on the nightstand. He turns off the light. And somewhere in a cemetery in Spring Lake, North Carolina, beneath a granite headstone with a bronze star and a line that reads, "Still here, brother," a soldier rests, carried, finally, by the brother he carried first, laid down gently in the ground of a country he served, his name no longer on a wait list, his phone still ringing every night at 9, answered not by a voice but by the love that outlives every war and every silence and every parking lot at 3:47 in the morning. A man called his brother every night for 11 years and said 3 words, and then one night the phone rang 4 times and no one answered, and the silence on the other end was the loudest thing he had ever heard. Sometimes the distance between a soldier and his grave is not a battle or a diagnosis. It is a wait list, a number, a name that wasn't called in time. And sometimes the bravest thing a brother can do is not the carrying or the dragging or the pulling from the fire. It is the calling, night after night, into the voicemail, into the silence. Still here, still here, still here. If this incredible story of 2 brothers bound by war and love touched your heart, subscribe to this channel and hit the like button. Share this with someone who believes it is never too late to honor the people who carried us, or to carry them home. Have you ever lost someone who saved your life? Share your story in the comments. Because as Marcus and Elijah proved, love does not have an expiration date.